Season 5 of Binge O'Clock Podcast will be discussing The Terror, an AMC show based on the book of the same name. Although The Terror is a fictionalization of real events, the material depicts medical, survival, and supernatural horror, as well as racism, misogyny, gore, and violence. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Binge O'Clock, the podcast where we watch something and then we talk about it. I'm Joy Selden, and I've seen almost everything.
I'm Danielle Nga, and I've seen almost nothing.
I'm Nella, and I promise that I now understand that this is a marathon, not a sprint.
It's going to be a long winter, and we need to save. We need to ration what we have, Nella, and make it last for the duration of the season.
For those of you listening, I have not yet edited the last episode, and I am dreading it because I know how much it went off the rails. And I'll try really hard to make something salvageable out of it, but I know I was too much. I have re-examined my approach to this. I'm going to sit back and let them describe the episodes before I jump in with all the history. I promise you, I will try to keep my unbridled enthusiasm in check.
Like lightly in check, because we like some enthusiasm. We want some enthusiasm.
This is why I'd be a terrible teacher. Lesson plans, I can't follow. Like, if you ask me one question, there goes the lesson plan. I have a lesson plan for this podcast, and I got to only about a quarter of it in the last episode, which is horrifying to me.
Now, to be fair, I think that I have to take some of the blame for two reasons. One, at least 20 minutes of our last recording session, and I don't know how many of those minutes will make it to the final cut, dear listeners, but at least 20 minutes of the last recording session were Nella attempting to explain to me who was who in this show. Because it is really freaking difficult to keep track of people's first names and last names and titles all at once. So maybe some of those 20 minutes will disappear, but 20 of those minutes were my fault. And then I got a nosebleed and just turned off my video and was a little bit more quiet for another, 15 minutes. So,
and you can't just be quiet, Danielle, because if you're quiet, then I feel like I have to fill the void with talking because it's a podcast. We can't have silence in a podcast.
It's not what they're here for.
I really love that we found out today that the reason Danielle had muted her mic was because she had a nosebleed. It wasn't brought up before. It was literally just because Danielle and I both are major allergy sufferers. We're just I'm going to have a box of tissues right next to me and maybe I'll mute, we'll see. But yeah, 100%. Does that occasionally happen where we're okay, Danielle, vamp, because I'm not going to record myself blowing my nose. It's just not going to happen.
Long vamp. The 15 minutes of airtime in which all I said was, that's what was happening. Video off.
We'll see if we just add that to Twitter as a fun little, can you guess how long Danielle's nosebleed was? Let's see. Let's take a poll. Whoever comes closest gets a sticker.
Okay, so here we are in episode 2.
So here's the road so far.
Yes.
Danielle has the road so far.
Episode 1, we've been introduced to our cast of characters. Please don't ask me to name them all. I simply cannot.
That's okay.
However,
I am biting my fist.
However, we have Team Erebus and Team Terror. And in episode 1, after we're introduced to the cast of characters and given a little bit of information about each of them, though I will say episode 2 does more of a deep dive. So I'm excited to see where the show takes each of these characters. Because, we're just going to we're going to get to know them better as the show continues. After we're introduced to the cast of characters and the two ships, we then are taken very quickly through the series of events that leads to these two ships getting trapped in the ice. And honestly, I'm still shocked that we got to the ships being trapped in the ice within the first episode. I thought it would take us a little longer, but it did not.
it was fun that they were able to get stuck at the end of that first episode, because you're never sure if that's going to like open the following episode or if it's going to be, it's a pretty good cliffhanger point, or start your show with them already stuck.
Okay, but we're doing it again. We're getting ahead of ourselves. So, Joy, if you could give us the recap of what happens in episode 2 titled Gore, courtesy of Wikipedia.
In June 1847, after a winter stranded in the ice, Erebus and Terra remain stuck. Franklin sends out parties to find leads or open water passages through the ice. The party that treks east finds nothing, but the party led by Lieutenant Graham Gore accidentally shoots an Inuit man, mistaking him for a polar bear. During the chaos, a massive unseen creature kills Lieutenant Gore, period. Kills Lieutenant Gore, the surviving men. Oh no! The surviving men from the Gore expedition return from the wounded Inuit man and his companion, an Inuit woman. The man is a powerful shaman without a tongue to speak, and the woman is his daughter. He communicates that after his death, she must control the Tumbak. After the Inuit man dies of his wounds, the woman is brought to the Terror, and Captain Crozier, Mr. Blanky, and Dr. McDonald, oh no, I left off the doctor, attempt to speak to her.
I suppose the book starts more like episode 2 does, which is episode 2 opens up and it's spring. It's 8 months later.
Crozier is so salty.
There's a cat.
Oh my God, Crozier is so salty. Yeah, well, that's how the book starts, right? The book starts with them already having been trapped in the ice. And we go through that flashback of that very specific, officer meeting where Crozier gives his recommendation. And you have Crozier in the thick of his brown study, his depression, his alcoholism.
Yeah.
And the death of Franklin is pretty imminent. And they are aware that something is on the ice hunting them, which we haven't in this episode really experienced yet. And we get to it towards the end of it.
Yeah.
I love that you can just casually talk about characters dying because we know no one survives.
Yes, right?
Yes, that's the best
There's
part.
zero spoilers.
Literal no spoilers. Zero whatsoever. They all die.
Yeah. It's ultimately, it's going to be like, I'm not going to tell you how. It's going to just drop and it's going to happen. And then that's going to be like
will you tell me one thing? Do I have to see either the cat or the dog die on screen?
No.
Okay.
That's
spoilers, what I know. That's the only thing I don't want.
Spoilers, be prepared. The monkey does get sick and die. And the monkey becomes a plot point for Dr. Goodsir or Mr. Goodsir. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Good to know.
So there is that. There's a little bit of poor monkey.
Yeah.
But the cat or the dog do not die.
Yeah, we do not see the cat or the dog die. Thank goodness. Because I know the cat is a ship's cat, and the cat is one of those mean-looking toms that is just like, I kill rats. Do you know how hard a ship rat goes? I'm the one that kills them. And it looks like a mangy kind of like, no one pets this cat. This is a mean cat kind of thing. And I'm still like,
this cat is eating well with all these
so
rats.
help me.
8 months later,
so help me. If you had harmed that cat on screen, I would have not been okay. Neptune is a good boy. But if you had hurt that cat, Fagin, I would have lost it.
Now, what's interesting about the way this episode opens up is that, like I said, it is 8 months later. So we've kind of skipped the 8 months of probably despair that the men had to suffer through. And now we're in springtime where people are sort of in good spirits again. People are cheering. People are optimistic about these 2 ships that are going off to find leads.
One thing I want to just put out there is that, yes, there was descriptions of people who had done one Arctic expedition and then were like, never again. It was like being entombed. It was terrible. I hated it. There was very much an acknowledgement of as bad as scurvy was the ennui, the depression, the lack of motivation that would affect men in the darkest parts of being trapped on ice over winter in the Arctic. You're in this cold boat, even though the Terror and Erebus had a way of heating the boat through the steam engine. They had pipes running through the ship, that only brought the temperature up to above freezing. So it's still cold. It's still miserable. You're trying to conserve oil and other materials. So you only have so many hours of light. They had these patent glass sort of skylights, very small round lights that were supposed to bring light down into the ship. But you're in an Arctic winter. So guess what? There's no daylight.
Yeah.
You're in the darkness for like 23 hours a day.
Brutal.
Brutal.
But that's what I mean. Like, we just skip those 8 months. We don't get to see them.
They were, in these expeditions, for the experiences of Perry and Ross and other expedition leaders knew that you bring books, you bring games, they had an organ, they had a music box that had a certain amount of songs. They understood you had to do something. After 7 p.m., the men had class. You could take a class to learn how to read. Let's discuss Herodotus. The idea was we have to maintain structure, but we also have to do something that men can look forward to in their day, because they are trapped in very small quarters. It's no fresh air. All you have to look forward to is your meal and your rum, and maybe like getting to sit and learn something new and read a book.
They would have had to bring so many candles or oil or something.
But they would have been carefully rationed, because what if you're stuck another winter?
Well, that's the thing. So if like you're up at night and you're taking classes, you need light to be able to see. So I suppose that they slept for a decent number of those darker hours.
Well, there would have been watches. There would have been a rotation. I forget what the watches would have been like during that, because then also when the ship gets ice locked, you would build up the sides of you would cut out ice and put it along the ship to further insulate it. You would cut like a gang walk, a couple of stairs in ice, so you can easily walk off the ship and walk over to the next ship. They didn't have lanterns between the two ships, but they had guidelines. So if you had to walk to the other ship, you could just follow the guideline and not get lost in the dark and in the ice. During the winter on the ice, you could assume that the ships were set up until the ice pack started shifting and making it difficult to transverse. They would have been set up that the two ships could have communicated easily, went over to the other ship, just for the variety of people, of experiences.
Not that Francis took advantage of that particular arrangement.
Not according to the show. Yeah, absolutely. I love how catty Fitzjames and Franklin get cozy over in the Everest, like having 8 months to be gossipy with each other about Crozier never calls, he never writes.
He doesn't even eat over here anymore. It's been ages since we've seen him. He's avoiding us. Of course, I mean, the way the show is written, Sir John, what he would like to do is repair the relationship, which is one of the first things we see them doing once they've sent off the two. Yeah, I've just called them party number 1 and party number 2.
Sure.
But basically the men with the little boats going off to the east and the west to see whether they can find leads.
Yes.
Really cool aerial shot there, by the way.
Oh, so good.
Yeah. Yeah. No, the cinematography here gets really interesting for like, they're obviously on a soundstage and there's obviously green screen, but like you don't feel that. Like they're the way they're able to set up their on location shots really just take you completely to another place, and you're not like constantly looking for the CGI. Like it all feels very realistic and desolate.
Yeah. So wait, do you want to talk about what's happening on the ships first, or shall we talk about parties number 1 and 2?
I think when Nella and I were watching it, we started talking about Franklin and Fitzjames because they're so cliquey.
Yes.
They're just, that friend group where you get along with one friend a little bit more than everyone else. And then it's like, before you know it, it's like, but what about friend C? We haven't seen friend C in a while. And friends A and B are like, I don't know. Do they not like us? And it's like, you two just, you took up all the air in the room. I don't know what to tell you.
You expressly went against my advice, and now we're maybe going to die because of you,
I know.
Meanwhile, here's Sir John with like, oh, summer is on its way. It's starting to get warmer. And Francis is like, no, dude, it is not. Like, summer is here in name only. We need to buckle down.
Like the sun dogs are still out there. The cold is still here. Like, what are you doing? Why are you this happy-go-lucky? Nella is going to burst out of her chair. Yes.
So sundogs don't necessarily mean that it's a cold winter in the Arctic, but it's fine for a good, like, wives' tale. So you've been in the Arctic before. If there's a lot of sundogs, that means it's colder than normal. However, there was a Arctic scientist by the name of Roy Kuhner who was like, I wonder how cold it was when Franklin was there. So he did ice cores. He dated them back to the 1840s. And how you read an ice core is if there is a warmer summer and the ice melts, it refreezes, and then you get a clear translucent line of melt ice. And you can trace back like where there was that melting, freezing, melting, freezing. In the period that he was able to narrow down to the 1840s, there was no clear line. It was just solid, unmelted ice. Now, it just so happened.
5 years, I think you said?
Hang on, I'm getting there. He then compared it to an ice core that was dated to the 1970s that looked identical. And since it's the 1970s, we have the weather patterns of the Arctic in the 1970s, and it was stupid cold, and he described it as, and I quote, almost permanent winter, freak conditions lasting for 5 long years.
Yeah.
They were doomed.
Doomed. And because we're
out.
living, within the fiction of the show, they were doomed because no one listened to Francis. And so now Francis is off in his ship sulking, and the rest of them are just trying their best to be cheery.
I mean, because what else can you? I mean, what are you going to do? Drink whiskey and be depressed in your cabin?
I mean, that's what
That's what Francis is doing.
That's what Francis is doing.
It's literally what Francis is doing for 8 whole months. I love that, we have this, because I think off the pod, Nella has described Franklin as this like Labrador retriever who wants everyone to like him. And and he's like genuinely a good dude, and he's genuinely a good person. And he has this optimistic attitude. And like, he believes very, he's a very good Christian. He believes very strongly in the Bible. But like ultimately he tries to make friends. And I love that we have this dichotomy between this man who obviously wants to make friends with Crozier and just not. Like Crozier is just like, you're my captain and I will follow you, Captain.
Do you want to know what I think it's more so than he wants to make friends? He cannot stand the idea of someone not wanting to be his friend.
That's what I was going to say.
That's a really good distinction to make here. We're in the Great Cabin. And again, of course, this is all fictionalized, but we're in the Great Cabin. He has walked over to Terror to try to repair our bonds. He very clearly, openly, jovially says. And Jared Harris is so good in the scene where he says, you're my cat. And he's like, he is playing it like Francis Crozier is trying to, I'm not trying to be the asshole here. You're my captain. Of course, if you call, I will come. I follow you. You are the leader. And it's not what Franklin wants to hear, because Franklin cannot abide the idea of someone not wanting to be his bosom buddy.
Yeah. Of someone literally just saying, we don't have to be friends for me to like follow your orders, for me to be a good sailor.
Like, hey man, this is a professional relationship.
Yeah. Or we can be friendly, but I'm not your friend. I'm not going to come over and gossip. I'm not going to come over and pretend like our shared history isn't a weight between us. And that's where we get the flashback to Sophia.
Yeah. I mean, we get a couple of interesting pieces in this episode related to Francis. Who, I mean, I keep calling him by, that is his first name, right?
Yes.
See, I'm not kidding.
Francis Croden Moira Crozier. Don't quote me on that. He has like so many names. Bless his heart.
But everyone calls him Francis in the show, so that's what I'm sticking to, at least for now. But we get a couple of interesting pieces with him, and one of them is with Sophia, but then the other one has him oddly tied to Lieutenant Irving, Mr. Gibson, and Mr. Hickey. whose names I did write down because I wanted to make sure I understood who was who there.
Yes. So let's talk about Sophia first.
Yeah. Okay. So
we get
Sophia, I guess, is, well, I don't know. She calls Sir John her uncle. Are they like uncle by blood?
Precisely. She was the niece of Sir John and Lady Jane. And Sir John also had a daughter from his first marriage, but we never see her in the show. The focus is on Sophia because the focus in the book is on Sophia.
They're legitimately related. She's not just like his ward or something.
No, no.
Right? Okay.
I mean, they did take her in, but she was his niece.
Okay.
But no, a blood relative.
I mean, because that complicates things, right?
I mean, sure. But she was with the Franklins in Van Diemen's Land. And it was in Van Diemen's Land where she met Ross and Crozier. Ross being, the hot new thing coming up in society who, he was the captain of the Everest. Crozier was the captain of the Terror. They rolled up into Van Diemen's Land and Crozier was like, oh my God, Sophia, she's beautiful. She's magnificent. I love her. I'm going to propose. And then she's like, you're a little too Presbyterian and Irish, but your boy Ross, like, he's really hot. Can I would like to marry that. And then meanwhile, like James Clark Ross, he marries Anne. Back in England. And Anne is the one who's just like, no more Arctic exploration. He's like, on it.
Drama.
The drama. Yeah. So she in history, Sophia rejects him in Van Diemen's Land.
Did the show play up how much of a hand Sir John had in her rejecting his proposal? Because in the show, she does reject Francis, right? But then Sir John is like, yeah, and then agrees and doesn't want Francis to be part of their family because of his background.
So this is if you were my student, I would be like, that's a really interesting question. Write it on an index piece of paper and I will research it and get back to you on it, because actually I'm not sure historically if Sir John had a hand in saying he's too common, he's too Irish, he's too Presbyterian, you can't. Or if it was just Sophia being like, I like the younger guy. I like the 33-year-old over the 47-year-old.
Because obviously in the show, it just adds to the drama, right? It just like adds as another wedge between the two characters.
In the show, it's almost explicitly like the reason she rejects him is because of Sir John.
Yes,
like
exactly.
There's no other reason that she seems to have. Like they go, they go see the opera together. They hang out. Like they genuinely seem to enjoy each other's company. And then Sir John is just kind of like, no, good for you. Reject
Nuts
that
on
man.
there are better. And then Francis overhears,
right? Like maybe check yourself.
I'm so mad as you are the head of your household. She was late to supper because she was talking to someone.
Yeah.
Like
situational awareness, Sir John.
Did you hear the door close behind him? No? Then he's still in your house.
He clearly escorted her home. He wouldn't not escort her home.
Also, once you've gone this is Victorian England. If you got a rejection for a proposal from in society, you would be a mess and probably not leave right away.
But again, in the show, it sets up that this is not his first proposal. It's his third. And that's when we get the great line from Sir John of he's an explorer, and explorers are built on hope.
I love that.
I love that. I love that depiction of Crozier, right? Because we see him so depressed. Why would anyone entrust him with anything? But the idea of that he is actually made of hope is going to come into such frame once it becomes hopeless. And suddenly Crozier blossoms because he's made of hope.
Because he's made of hope. It comes through a couple of times in the episode too, when we deal with the Inuit couple. Although we're not there yet, so we'll discuss them later. First, though, do we have to talk about Mr. Hickey? I mean, we know almost nothing about this character at this point.
Well, look.
So the reason Nella and I want to talk about Hickey is because Hickey comes into play later. But to be fair, you, as someone who hasn't seen the show before, are like, why are we following this dude?
Well, so here's here's the tiny little bit I know about him, at least thus far. He's narratively relevant because he is how we find out a little bit more about Francis's backstory and the fact that he's Irish, and that's part of the reason, people are less accepting of him, right?
Oh, God, what a good scene, because, and I don't want to get too spoilery about it, but Hickey is a fantastic reader of people.
Mm.
And he takes so many risks because fundamentally Hickey is a con man, and we will get into it of we're going to see it over and over again with Hickey as more about Hickey is revealed. But fundamentally, Hickey reads people on the fly, and he takes chances. And outside of this experience in the Arctic, he would do very well for himself. But he is a huckster who has been thrown into a very particular situation.
Where he can only con so many people.
I mean, I could see that because it's not just anyone who finds his way into the captain's cabin and then gets to share a drink with him.
Now, mind you, the reason he would have been in the captain's cabin is because he was the second caulker. He was the person responsible for taking tar and making sure that holes were sealed up. So when we have Sir Francis being like, your seat of ease, which was, the officer toilet has a draft, you would call the caulker to caulk it. So there's no more draft. It would have been his job to do that. However, he also makes a big deal of Neptune took it on the floor and I'm cleaning it up, sir. According to the ship's manifest, Crozier knows that he would have claimed from Ireland, but he doesn't have an Irish accent. And that's where he says, well, I was raised in Manchester, sir. So I got rid of my accent. That's what I'm
saying. Like, there's the sort of person who would pop in and pop out because they have a job to do. And then there's the sort of person who gets into conversation with Francis and ends up being poured a drink. Right?
Yes.
And that's Hickey.
But Hickey, and you're going to see why this matters. When Crozier says, but you're Irish, you don't have much of an accent. And he goes, well, I was raised and lived in Manchester, sir. That matters. And you're gonna, and when you see why, you're gonna scream.
if you're paying very close attention in that scene, this is like the benefit of us having seen it already and being like, now we're looking at every small little thing.
Yeah.
When Hickey says we were all really happy when a Mick got an officer position or whatever it was, like he uses Mick, and you watch Crozier pause when he picks up the bottle to pour him a drink.
I did notice that.
Yeah, it's not, it's not like it's not like especially of the time, but it's definitely not like in this country how you take a word back. Like this would not be a conversation that two Irish people would be having where one of them would refer to Irish people as Micks. Like that is unusual.
Uncouth, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's
I love that little tidbit of and I love that Crozier clocks it.
Yeah.
Because it's like he is also looking for anything else that could possibly go wrong on this voyage.
Now, was it my imagination or did Hickey's accent slip a bit in that scene too? Because there were maybe 2 to 3 words in one phrase where I was like, and then he slipped right back.
I think it totally did. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's a conscious character decision based on what I know later on in the series.
I think it's totally fair to be like, something's off with Hickey and keep an eye on him because it was so funny because we were like, oh man, we didn't even talk about Hickey in the first episode. And I was like, Nellie, you have to remember Hickey doesn't matter in the first episode, except that he hates the dog. That's why we don't like Hickey in the first episode. I was like, I am suspicious. You don't. I didn't even
notice that those two people were the same character.
I know.
You're the one who pointed out that those two people were the same character to me. Because at that point, Hickey was just like a sea of faces that I just immediately forgot, right?
The only thing you know about Hickey after episode 1 is that he hates the dog and that he is the one who goes down to fix the coffin that had broken. He is the guy. He is the one that goes down to actually try to get it
Davy's
shut
coffin.
and then come back out.
Oh, well, you don't want to be haunted by one of those folks. So I get that. I get that as an instinct.
The thing to keep in mind moving forward with Hickey is that Hickey always has an ulterior motive to everything he does.
Yeah.
Yeah, you think he's doing one thing, he's doing like 6 things.
He is the Xanatos Gambit of the show.
Yes. He is the Xanatos Gambit. Clock it. What episode are we on? We're on episode 2. Xanatos Gambit has shown up.
I love it. I love it.
So Hickey gets caught with another shipmate. Mm-hmm. Do we know the other shipmate's name? I'm sorry, I didn't even write
Mr.
it down.
Gibson.
Yes.
Mr. Gibson. Down in the bowels of the ship for
illicit
having
adult
sex.
Activity.
There it is.
Yes. Rum, sodomy, and the lash. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
they're trying
caught
badly to cover it up. It doesn't work.
They're caught by Lieutenant Irving, which I love Hickey's line about Irving, where Gibson is like, he's going to tell, and Hickey's like, no, he's not, because that would require...
He'd have to acknowledge what he saw.
He'd have to have an imagination, because he didn't see anything, so he'd have to have an imagination.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a good character read on Irving. I love that so much. Although I will say, like, you know, Hickey and Gibson, they are the bad gays in the series, and I am very mad that it diminishes the good gays, which are Harry Pegler and John Briggins.
Now, who are they in the show?
They show up in this episode when Sir John sends the 2 lead parties. Mm-hmm. There is a brief scene where an older man goes to a younger man who is preparing one of the lead boats, and he has a book for him, Herodotus. He brings him a history of Herodotus.
Oh, the lending library is around.
Lending, yeah.
Oh, that was cute.
I know. So here's the thing. In the book, they are canonically an ex-couple. They had gotten together years ago. The older gentleman has a reputation of being gay, but because he never does anything on voyage or on boats, it's just accepted. People ignore him. But once he's on land, he goes hog wild. And they get together and they have a relationship, a sexual relationship for years. But then it hits a point where they realize this no longer works for us. We're going to go our separate ways. And then they end up on this expedition again together, one on the Terror and one on the Erebus. So they have a connection. They have a history. They still care deeply for each other as an ex-queer couple, but they're not in the book.
Although I do love that Nella clocked them as a queer couple.
I watched the show first, and I was like, "These are the queers," and then I read the book, and I was like, "They were the queers the whole time." Not in history. We don't know. Here's why the book said this is a queer couple. Of the bodies found on King William's Land, they find one body face down, and this is what becomes the Pegler Papers. The body was that of Briggins, but the journal was that of Pegler.
Hi everyone, this is Nella's foot coming live to you from her mouth. I just wanted to jump in here because every once in a while I say something that there is more nuance behind it, and even though we'll probably get to it in a later episode, as I edit it, it just bugs me so much, and I just have to quickly jump in and just say the book decided that the body that was found with the Pegler Papers was Briggins, but historians, their money is on 2 other possible Stuarts instead of Briggins. It's one of those things that we don't really know. One of those mysteries. I'll probably bring it up again later on. But for some reason, this kept me up at night, and I had to clarify. So enjoy the rest of the episode. Foot out.
So what the author did with it, ran with it, was that they were this queer couple who cared deeply for each other, and that Briggins took Pegler's journal, which is very coarsely written. It's got a lot of enigmas. It's got a lot of riddles and like weird writing and drawings and things, and walked off into the Arctic with it and then just keeled over dead on top of it.
Oh my gosh.
Which, if I had found that out and was writing a book, I might be like, this was true love Fight me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like there's a connection here. There's a deep connection here. Now,
I mean, like,
this is
look,
actually...
can I sit here and be like, oh, so you took like a piece of writing from someone you cared about so that their family knew their last words? Fine. Because people did that in World War I, right? You'd like swap letters, like, if you die, put it in your pocket. If I die, I'll put yours in my pocket. You know, like that kind of thing. But then also, like, I'm not going to begrudge Dan Simons for being like, and they were gay.
Absolutely
we would
not.
never. Okay, so this is actually a pretty good segue to the other half of the show, right? Because one half of the show takes place on the ship, and the other half of the show is the two lead parties. And then in the third act of this episode, everyone comes back together, which we still need to have time to discuss, right?
Good luck.
So, yeah, seriously. So we have these two lead parties, and I have called lead party number 1 the party that includes Good Sir and Gore.
The best party.
Because
The good party.
That's why I called them party number 1. Good Sir and Gore.
The GGs.
Well, and I think we can briefly talk about party number 2, which they go out and they come back sooner. Some of their food has rotten. They had a rough time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
found no leads.
And found no leads. And Franklin, very nicely is like, please give these boys an early supper. And
I love the scene though of the man on the deck being like, I'm sorry we failed you, Sir Franklin. And he's like, no, you didn't fail me. No, perish the thought.
I mean, and I also love that he was like, that direction wasn't, necessarily, we didn't think you'd find anything anyway. And then I would just sit there with well, then why did you send me?
Just in case. Well, no, just in case.
Jinx.
Again, it's just
his face, though, after he says it. His face directly
how
after
it drops.
He says it. Oh, so good.
He is just trying to reassure a man who is like, I'm sorry, I failed you. And he's like, you didn't fail me. I sent you to do a task and you did the task. And again, that speaks to the perception of John Franklin as like a very caring, very, I wouldn't say charismatic, but very fatherly captain. He forbade swearing on his ships. Like, he was just like, we're all just good boys and I just want to take care of you. Like,
yeah.
Is very Fitzjames a good boy? Because I don't feel that Fitzjames is a good boy.
No, Fitzjames is a good boy, and you're going to find out why. I can't wait. No,
I mean, he is, but he's also a little brat. But he is a good boy.
Look, he's the good boy who was like the smartest kid in the class, who made friends with the most popular boys. But I have a lot of feelings about Fitzjames. It's fine. But moving on.
Gore and Good Sir. Okay, so that's party number 2, right? Party number 1 goes east. And this is the party with Good Sir and Gore.
This is the party that is heading towards King William's land. So they're specifically looking for a cairn that was left by Ross almost 20 years previously or about 15, 20 years previously. And that's where we get the exposition of the pack ice, of what it means to be trapped on the ice floes, and how when they crash against the land, you have a movable object meeting an unstoppable force.
Right. And just those like giant plates rubbing together creates these like mountains of ice, which was fantastically done in the show. So they continue toward where they think Cairn, is that how you say it?
Cairn?
Cairn?
You know what?
Like, how do you say that word? I can't say it without going like,
it is spelled very weirdly, listeners. It's like C-A-I-R-N.
Cairn. I just looked at the pronunciation. Cairn.
It's a mountain of rocks, right? And you can put things inside of the mountain or the mound of rocks, which is what they're there to do. They're there to put this, a message inside a cylinder inside the cairn, and hopefully someone else will come through.
It's a common hiking thing to do.
Yeah.
Like, if you're hiking out in the wilderness and you want to protect your supplies, you can build a cairn, but then also you put it up someplace. You see, the problem is I say cairn, but all I can hear in my head is the comedy special from Kathleen Madigan, where she talks about like going to Ireland and asking an old man about when was the last time you had corn? Kern? No, never touch the stuff. And all I can hear in my head is Kern when I say Karn.
Every time. Every time. Me as well.
Every time.
Okay.
Curse
Every
you,
time.
Kathleen Maticus.
This is why I try not to say it. That's my secret, Cap. I don't ever say it, and then I won't
I've
ever
said
feel
it
like
like
that.
4 times. I have now been recorded 4 times attempting to say the word Karen, and it's like so embarrassing.
Kern.
Error. Okay, so
I
they
get
get
it.
to the Karen. They open it up. They leave a message in the
But
cylinder.
also, the point of it is you put it on a hype spot so that if you're far away, you can see it. And you're like,
Yes.
that's an unusual piece of rock over there. I bet that's human made. And then you go and you look at it, and then it has you can put something in the center of it. That's also why the national park system is like, don't go making cairns all over the place. If you like, we have set markers throughout the trail, and if you make one for shits and giggles, we'll go out there and we'll knock it over and we'll be mad at you.
Yeah.
Because they're important things for trails and information.
Now,
Yeah.
not to skate over this too much, but just to summarize what happens with party number 1 as quickly as possible, they make the crucial mistake of splitting the party not once, but twice. The first time they split the party...
Regrets were had.
The first time they split the party, my heart sank a little bit, and I thought to myself, well, that's it. You know, someone's gonna die. And it turns out, actually, that no one died the first time they split the party. But because they're so foolhardy, they decide to split the party again. So the first time they split the party, 2 of them go on to the second cairn. There it is again. And
Which
the rest
they built
of them...
themselves because... So there were 2, this is where we get the 2 notes from Gore. You have the Gore point note and the victory point note. And they were both placed there by Lieutenant Gore in this period. So they put one down, walked, put one down. And there is debate about how far south they went and if the point was also like to do cartography, to get a sense of where the leads were. We're not sure how far south they went, but we know that they probably were traveling for quite a bit of time in this party, and they possibly could have been moving pretty fast, which suggests that they weren't actually sledding a large boat the whole way, which is an exhausting endeavor to do. It makes sense that they would have probably left the boat somewhere at a central location and then continued the rest of the way on foot.
Now, question.
Yes.
Were they bringing this boat because they were hoping that they would actually hit water and be able to use it?
No, because it was...
Because I was like, there's no way. Is it just the easiest way to cart their supplies?
Yes. And
Okay, all right.
easiest way, I still mean it's the worst way.
But why wouldn't they bring, like, a sled?
That's a great question. So...
Write that on an index card
why
and I
not-
will look it up.
I was like, a boat? Are they I was like, there's no way they're hoping to hit open
So
water.
even if they were using one of the lighter boats that we know was on the ship, once it is loaded up with supplies, it's still a very heavy boat to sled across. And actually using human bodies to sled is very difficult.
Yeah.
We know that by the time they abandoned the ships, there were not enough of the lighter boats to do this. So they had to rely on the vastly heavier boats, which would have been 1,400 pounds of weight. So usually a sled party was 6 crew, 2 officers, which then also is very suggestive of why so many officers died. Once we get into it, but human sledding was something that a lot of British expeditions felt was just superior to learning how to use dogs. There's the whole scene with Crozier and Blanky where they're like, remember Perry and his reindeer?
Yeah, and the reindeer.
The reindeer, you know. The British were always looking for another way of traversing the Arctic. And they always came back to, no, we'll just drag it ourselves. It's easier.
It feels very British to me. That feels like a very British answer.
Yeah.
But wait,
course-
even if they wanted to drag it themselves, would it not be easier to drag a sled than a boat?
They didn't
And you
have
still would have
sleds.
had to
But why
have a
would it-
sled on your boat in the Arctic.
But if you know that you're bringing a boat to the Arctic, you know what I mean?
So
I don't know.
they didn't have like indigenous style human sleds.
They
that
just
were,
had no idea that you
much
could.
more streamlined. No, they understood that that's what the indigenous Inuit did. But they didn't build that. What they had was oak, and they had boats. So they would put the boats on two sleighs, and then they would haul that. Because we already have the shape of it. We can load it up high, and we know that about 6 men can haul it.
Okay, all right. So they've got these boats, the party splits, the party comes back together, and then there's hail, the size of, like, grapefruits that falls out of the sky.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now this was a part that Nella also brought up, that the book also has these like supernatural storms that happen throughout.
Yeah, like horrifying supernatural storms. And what I love is I do think Dan Simons based this on archaeological record, because when the boats were abandoned, we have the first major camp where there were big tents in a circle, and we have a lot of supplies that were left behind. And Iceblink, the book, really explains how this was a very calculated abandonment of the boats. A lot of supplies were brought out, and what they do find are metal poles with lightning catchers left at this main camp. This speaks to, on King William's land at the time, there was a problem with lightning, because you have to imagine this is a very flat landscape. There aren't trees. You are the tallest thing out there.
Yeah.
For miles.
You have to think about being Crozier, who was the surviving commanding officer at that time, being like, all right, pull the metal from the boats. We're going to set up lightning catches away from the camp, and everyone stay below those. Like, they were conscious of the difficulties of this landscape when they abandoned the ships. And so, therefore, it makes sense that the show would depict this violent weather patterns of a lightning storm that comes with massive hail.
Huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. The book makes it much more supernatural, but the show makes it this is just the landscape.
Yeah. Well, what else does the storm bring but a monster? Well, not really a monster, but, well...
A couple of indigenous folk and maybe a monster.
And maybe a monster, yes. Well, this is where the party splits for the second time, right? Begins to hail. The hail is very brief. The men hear a bear roar, right? I forgot to mention, actually, that their boat full of supplies was ravaged by something, and they think perhaps it's a bear. So when they hear the bear roar, some of the men decide to exit the safety of the tent and go hunt the thing down to kill it and eat it. Which, like, listen, they're short on food. I get it, right? But half
short
the
on
parties,
fresh food for sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
But that's the other problem. Like, so you had Marines on the two ships. The Marines were not trained to hunt with their guns. They were just there to have control of the guns and the gun supplies. No one on the ships actually was trained for hunting in the Arctic.
Yeah.
So,
Dumb.
yeah.
But so that
agreed.
makes sense, because instead of shooting a bear, this person shoots a man.
Yes.
Fatally.
Oh, that was so upsetting.
It was super upsetting.
So half of them, not half of them, like two of them actually, including Gore, stay back at the tent. A bunch of them walked back toward this giant wall of ice to try and hunt this bear. But they get confused, and rather than hunting the bear, they end up following two Inuit people, one of whom they shoot, right?
Yeah.
But, you know, good sir's like running toward this wall of ice because everyone's like, good sir, come here. They've realized they've shot a man instead of shooting a bear. And then there's that wonderful scene where there's a lightning flash. It's chaos everywhere. Good sir turns around. He looks towards Gore and whoever else is at the tent. I don't know. And this massive, like, beast just erupts from the shadows and chops Gore in half.
Oh
He's
my God,
just
so
gone.
good.
He's just
And
mauled.
Good Sir screams and cut.
Cut.
Yeah. Commercial, I guess. Like, what? It happens, and it's so fast, and you know, you kind of sit there with oh no, he has to bring all of this back to the ship.
Yep. And then we just sort of get, like, the aftermath, weirdly, right? Like, we don't really see them having to struggle back to the ship. Instead, we go back to the ship, we get the backstory on Sophia, like, blah, blah, blah. Things happen, right? And then all of a sudden, actually, this is while Hickey and Francis are sharing a drink. The men start cheering. Party number 1 is back. You know, like
and
they're
they're
here.
running, so it must be good news. It is not good news.
Oh, it's not good news. They're not running because of good things. They're running because of bad things. They're running because they have a man on their sled that is not a sled. They have a man on their boat, and he's been shot. In fact, they shot him.
And they lost an officer. And this is a big deal. Because remember back when Franklin lost 11 men, but he was still hailed as like a hero and like he did his best? The reason was because those 11 men were not officers. They were local people. They were indigenous. But he didn't lose any officers.
Oh.
So I think the show does a really smart thing of kind of making Franklin's very dramatic turn into terse, angry dismissal about, what do you mean Gore is gone? What do you mean you lost an officer and he's dead? Like the
first thing they do is try to interrogate Good Sir and figure out like what actually happens. How do you know he's dead? And Good Sir is like, there's blood.
So about it.
There's blood everywhere. He's dead, you know?
Yeah.
Like how do you know he didn't survive the attack? Well, sir, there was a lot of blood on the ground and a man could not survive that amount of loss of blood. Like, you asked a doctor.
You asked not even a doctor. You asked an anatomist and a surgeon. He knows better than a doctor how much blood is too much blood to lose.
Yeah.
This is not the first time I will make a semantics issue
no, it's fine.
Of I'm going to call him a doctor because he's a doctor, dang it. He doesn't want to be called a doctor because he's an anatomist and the terminology of the time, and I know.
But that's also why we love Gore, who is just, when Good Sir is like, well, I'm not technically a doctor, I'm just an anatomist. And Gore says, you fix people who are hurt, that's a doctor enough for me. You know, and that's why we love Gore and we're sad when Gore dies.
Yeah.
Because Gore looks at Good Sir and he's like, and Gore recognizes and likes Good Sir. They have a great conversation. I love it. And I'm really sad when Gore dies.
Yeah. Me too. Oh, poor Good Sir. So traumatized. Okay. So not only is he interrogated about what happens to Gore, he also wants to attempt to save the Inuit man's life.
Yes.
Because, well,
and
you know.
This is the same shaman that Davy saw in his vision.
I mean, which Good Sir doesn't know, but he attempts to save him anyway.
But we know as the audience, this is the man who warned Davy, run.
Now, Dr. Stanley, I believe is his...
Yes.
Yep. Like, doesn't want this man treated in the ship. I mean, honestly, Sir John is not really here for him being treated on the ship. Like, he doesn't say no, but he also doesn't say yes. And he's very quick to kick the man's daughter off the ship as soon as...
Yeah. So...
everything is over.
Gosh, it's the same way in the book where Franklin wants her off the ship. But the reason in the book is because he's thinking back to the copper mine expedition where he lost 11 men. And in that time, there was an indigenous teenager that they all called Greenstocking because of the clothing she wore. And in real life, there were 2 men on his expedition that were obsessed with her, and they almost fought a duel over her. And he had to, like, send one off into the woods to cool his heels and, like, banish the other one.
Oh, so and that's what's happening here?
So the book makes it about Franklin sees this indigenous young... She's described in the book as between 15 and 20. Still a virgin. The book makes a big deal about how she's... The doctor determined she's still a virgin, and it's gross.
The doctor determined?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I think Nella will have to give us the cliff notes, and you'll have to tune in to Nella Explains a Thing.
I know.
For all of her feelings about Lady Silence in the book, and also...
oh boy, that's going to be an addendum, because we're coming up on our hour.
I know. But, like, so the thing is, in the book, Franklin's upset is very much more about his misogyny and his racist towards indigenous women.
Yeah.
Whereas the show, I think, smartly makes it about his feeling of losing control and having lost an officer, and how does he know that racistly these indigenous people are not to blame?
Yeah.
I think that is a
That's
good
how I read
pivot
it.
from how the book does it.
Because it's racist,
still,
but it's not as racist.
or it's not as gross. Let's be real.
Okay, yeah.
The book is gross towards who they decide to call Lady Silence because she doesn't want to speak. She can speak. In the book, she can't even speak. She's the one with the tongue ripped out, by the way.
Oh.
So then you have a woman on the ship who cannot even speak and no one can understand, and she is an enigma. And let's talk about the show dealing with the fact sometimes they refer to them as the Nasilic. Sometimes people drop the
E
what
word.
we now consider a slur, and then diminutives of that slur. The show, I think, tries to straddle the line as best as they can. But boy, does the book hold no bars because it's leaning into the sort of ragtime idea of let's just be racist because that's what people were like back then, right?
Yeah, which I think the show does straddle the line pretty well. Because,
Of what we've seen so far. But I think the
okay.
changes they made to Lady Silence are perfect. No notes. Like,
Okay,
they did
yeah.
what they
No,
added
Lady
so much to
Silence in
Lady
the show
Silence.
has a lot more agency. Like she has a lot more agency. She has a lot more control, even though she herself feels helpless. She tends to make choices, I think, that the Lady Silence in the book might not have been able to. So they're trying to operate on the father, and the father is going to die. There's no way to save him. Lady Silence throws herself on his body to try and like bring him out to die under the sky.
Yeah, he
Which
has
I
to
was
die
so heartbroken
under the
for because I was like,
right.
okay, everybody, heave ho, pick up a limb and let's carry him out. Like,
I know,
what,
Crozier
you even
calls
have
for a
somebody
stretcher,
there
and I'm
who
like,
He does.
understands his language. You have
Crozier.
someone there who understands what she's saying.
Like, just grab a leg, everyone.
Yeah.
Let's go. We can do it. 1, 2, 3, go.
But
Right,
instead, that's not what happened. Not that
no,
they
it's
would have
not.
made it anyway, but like, they could
Yeah.
have tried.
Yeah, it's just like everyone who was attempting to get the man outside was someone that everyone else wasn't listening to, right?
Yes,
like no one
exactly.
is paying any attention to the daughter. Francis is the only one who can understand what she's saying, so he's calling out to grab a stretcher, but, you know, Sir John and Fitzjames aren't listening to Francis. They're just like, get this woman off this ship. Why are we even treating this man? You know? Just coming up at the end of the episode, we do learn some new information here. Question mark, right? Like some aspects of the mystery are unveiled. First of all, this bear question mark creature is presumably Toonbach. Question mark,
Toonbach.
question mark.
Yeah, no,
we
it
don't
is
really
Toonbach.
know.
No, it's Toonbach. It's Toonbach.
I mean, like, I'm pretty sure we know, but like, oh, we don't know, right? As the daughter's begging her father to stay, she says that she's not ready. For whatever this responsibility is, that Toonbach won't obey her. So clearly there's some responsibility going on there. The show will unpack that, I assume.
Yeah.
And then the other two pieces we get are that the daughter is kicked off of the Erebus because they don't want her on the ship anymore. But Francis brings her back to the Terror. So there she is on the Terror.
And we have a scene where it is Francis, Blanky, also
Yes.
McDonald, as the Doctor of the Terror, did have Arctic experience themselves. And the show decides to make it that, okay, we're going to play it that these guys who had Arctic experience picked up some of the Inuktitut language, and I apologize if I pronounced that wrong, but like that they learned something enough to pick up on words and be able to communicate somewhat, but still missing a lot of nuance of the language. And that's where we get the great scene of whom they are now referring to as Lady Silence because she's not talking to anybody. She is sitting in the great cabin
On the Terror.
muttering to herself after Francis tries to communicate with her further and try to get like more information about her. And what he finally gets is, and I quote, she said, if we don't leave now, we're going to Hoi, which is translated as we're going to disappear.
But disappear can mean a lot of things.
And we get that last shot of the rest of the men understanding that word and being like, disappear, huh? And Grosjean's like, that's what you said. And we get that last shot of Lady Silence pulling something out of her mouth and like distributing it to the wind. Like
a silent gesture.
Pantomime. Yeah, like the pantomime of like something
your soul
just
is getting
leaving
sucked
your
out of
body.
your mouth.
Yeah.
And
Or I don't know,
that's
maybe
it.
your tongue's gonna get cut out. I don't know. Spoilers.
We don't know.
Yeah.
That's the
Who knows?
episode. And that's where we are. That's what's happened.
Oh my God, it's so good.
We did it. One more things.
One more thing.
We discussed all of the scenes. We talked about the cat. Love that cat. Love Fagin. Happy to hear he doesn't die. We talked about the deer. I thought maybe we would gloss over the deer.
The reindeer.
And I would get to talk about the deer, but no, we got them too. The men playing soccer.
Oh, yes. Bless their hearts. I'm not sure soccer, actually, I'm going to look it up. I'm pretty sure soccer would not have actually been.
Or maybe they
history.
called it football. But
Well, they might have.
you know.
They might have been playing rugby, actually.
Oh.
I guess rugby history.
Maybe, possibly. My one more thing is to actually ask Nella to talk about one other thing, which is the Franklin inner monologue that we got in the book, but that the actor is so able to do in the show.
Oh, yeah. So what I love about Kieran is that, look, I haven't really been able to read the script as much as I would like, but having seen the inner monologue of Franklin in the Terror of the book, the show blossoms from the same, and I'm about to say a name that I don't usually like speaking, but the problem with J.K. Rowling's 5th Harry Potter book, Order of the Phoenix, to me is Harry is a moody teenager who is suffering from, post-traumatic stress disorder, and J.K. Rowling has no concept of how to write that.
Yeah.
Right? So he just
Among
comes
other
off
things.
as whiny and awful. When, this is a kid, when you look at it now, I look at it now and I'm like, this is a kid who is suffering deep trauma. And no one is listening. No one
Who
is
has
paying any
post-traumatic
attention.
stress? Who has?
Right?
Like he has
and in the book,
PTSD. He has all the things.
in the book, it's played as like he's just going through puberty, and it's like this boy needs therapy, like, ma'am.
Yeah.
But then you get to the movie, right? And because you don't have an inner monologue, the problem is solved, right? Because you just see the actor dealing with the conflict within them, and you get it better than the book ever could do it. And I feel like we have that same thing happen with Franklin between the book and the show. The book is in his head, and for God's sakes, he's talking about that he sees Lady Silence's pubic hair, and he compares it to the pubic hair of his first wife and his second wife, and how weird and alien it is, and it's just no one needed to fucking know that. And thank God for the show, who's just no one needs that. No one needs that. All we need.
Well, that also, but the pessimism that you don't he says all these, yes, you did a good job. Well done. Smiles all around. And in his head, he is we are boned.
No, or more so, he's just I am deserving of recognition. This is my last chance. The book really in his own head is very much about how this is his last chance and he has to make it happen or else.
Right.
And the show doesn't have that. And it's so much better because you can still have a character who is so, you'd almost say, naively optimistic. But when the bad stuff starts happening, and when finally the one thing, you lose an officer, and when you see him crumble to the point where he dismisses the crisis at hand, which is there is a man dying in sickbay from a gunshot wound from his own people, and he just doesn't want to see it. He doesn't want to hear it. He wants to sit in his cabin and ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
When you have Good Sir there doing everything he can to try to save this man while he can.
Yeah.
And no one else is listening. Because Sir John has checked out, and the only people listening are the people who can, in their own way, as best as they can, understand the language being spoken and are trying to understand She wants his body out under the sky, like get a stretcher.
Yeah.
It's so much better than the book in my mind. But also, again, I think really exemplifies a kind of patronizing racism of Sir Franklin is still somebody who, I am the father of this expedition. I love all my men. But then as soon as someone foreign, alien, enters into it, then you add to it the death of a well-liked lieutenant, he shuts down. He hates it.
Yeah.
He cannot handle this kind of conflict. And
well,
I love
because
that.
how do you put a positive spin on that?
You
right?
can't.
Like the way
You
he's
can't.
managed the rest of it is, well, here's the positive spin. Spin, 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 spin team. And then you lose Gore, and it's like, no, there's no coming back from this.
And you try to make it that, like, but didn't maybe the indigenous caused the death of Gore? And no, that's not what happened. Good Sir is standing in front of you telling you it looked like a bear. And you and Fitzjames are like, I'm not sure I believe that. How dare you? You weren't there.
Yeah. Yep.
Like, also, just why would he lie? There's no, like, it's, you know, it's so ridiculous to me that it's just like that. And it's exactly right. It's like that kind of quiet racism that doesn't make any sense.
It's the genteel racism. It's the one of, well, you can't really trust them, can you? I mean, they're well and all, and like, we'll try to do well by them, but they're unreliable. They're untrustworthy.
Oh, I thought of one more thing. I'm sorry. It's very quick.
No, yeah, go.
Sophia is played by Sean Brooke, and she is, I know her from Sherlock Holmes. She played Eris. She played the sister.
Oh, yes.
And I know her from several other things too. I think she's also in a show with like David Tennant. I think she's a delight to watch. She was like Ophelia in Hamlet. Like she's so striking, and she's very good at her job. She's a very natural actress, even when she's doing stuff that's ridiculous, like on Sherlock. Like, but she's still somehow extremely realistic, and I just love to watch her. And that's not the last time we see Sophia either. She comes back into play.
Ooh, good. Yeah. Okay, that's exciting.
As a support to our aunt, and like I do think that like the actress is very good at playing this character. I kind of love it. So
I just want, I mean, obviously I want more detail on the expedition. I'm interested in that aspect of the story, but I would also like more backstory, please. All the backstory.
Sure. I will look up Sophia. I know the book has a very different take on her than the show. Which is also a little feels like, Dan Simon, do we need to talk about like how you might just not like women?
Yeah, I think Dan Simon has some female issues. But
maybe
on
Dan
that note,
doesn't like ladies. But on that note.
But we're just going to have to talk about that more next time.
Next time when there are more ladies, and then we can compare the amount of agency they have in the show versus in the book.
I'm so glad I inflicted the book in myself so I could bring the noise, bring the thunder,
and we're
bring the hottest of takes.
You're here to share the noise and the thunder with us
and thank you for not making us read it because
yeah, exactly. I was gonna say would not have read it. Could not have read it. Don't think I would have made it.
No,
based on what I'm hearing so far.
No, you know what? This is where I pull upon my Apocalypse Book Club roots, where I'm just like, I'm reading it so you don't have to.
Here are the highlights.
I'm sorry, Dan. You know what? We've grown as a people. I hope you've grown as a person, as a writer, as a nation. Like, that you just aren't writing women this way anymore.
Fingers crossed.
Hear me out. I'm sure you would sit across the table from me and be like, but I can justify it through historical record. And I'm like, but historical record aside, like, just because you could make a person the worst racist ever doesn't mean you have to make them the worst racist ever.
Whose historical records are we reflecting on?
Again.
But anyway, we are at the top of our hour, so between now and next time, we would love to hear from you. Please check us out at Binge O'Clock Pod on Twitter and Facebook, where you can answer the question, what book would you give to a friend for their 50-mile hike through the Arctic? You can also email us at bingeoclockpod@gmail.com, and don't forget, we have a Patreon. Find us at patreon.com/botpod.
That's right. And tell your friends, tell your family, tell your loved ones, tell the live lobsters in your life about Binge O'Clock, and we will see you next time.
So I would probably say a James Bond joint. Because the thing about a James Bond story, especially the earlier ones, like Ian Fleming wrote them to be easily, like each chapter very quick to read. And then you can put it down and pick it up again. So like if I was going on a 50-mile long hike, exhausting hike, I want something that I can read 3 pages of and not lose what I'm reading. So I want something light that keeps the action going, and then it can be like, oh yeah, 5 pages later, something new's happening, and it's exciting. So yeah, a James Bond novel by Ian Fleming.
I like that. Pick it up, put it down, easy to read. If you have to ration your candle and you can only read for 5 minutes, those are the 5 minutes you get.
Yeah. I was reading the earliest James Bonds on the subway, and it is 100% a commuter read. 1010 can attest.
10-10.
Nice.
If you've got like 2 subway rides and you're just like, let me just pick up on some James Bond, like something exciting will happen. You'll put it down, get back to the train like 8 hours later and be like, and now you're thrown back into it.
I'd probably do Heart's Hope, but that's just because I want more people to read it.
Yeah, sure.
It's out of print. It's one of my favorite high fantasy novels. I don't particularly like the author, but it's Orson Scott Card. But like it is my favorite book. And it's ultimately I'm just like, more people need to read this. I would probably throw that at everybody, regardless of how far they have to walk in the Arctic.
That's a good problematic fave. Orson Scott Card, God his heart.
Yeah, which is why I don't mind throwing that book at people, because again, it's out of print. All the versions I would have from it would be secondhand.
Ooh, good call. Yeah, money not making its way back that way.
Just saying.
Just saying.